12 years of marriage. That's a long time, isn't it? Clara and I had been inseparable since we were kids, sweethearts from the age of 10. I still remember the way she'd beam at me on the playground, her laughter lighting up the world. After high school, while college never called my name, I landed a job as a draftsman at Desmond Engineering. Clara and I got married the following year, and not long after, we were blessed with our twin daughters, Harper and Hazel. Times were tough at first, scraping by on my paycheck while Clara stayed home to care for the girls. But we managed, pinching pennies and finding joy in the little things. We bought a modest house, drove reliable second-hand cars, and built what felt like a solid life. Clara always dreamed of being a stay-at-home mom, and I was glad to make that happen for her. She was my rock, my partner, my everything. Or so I thought. Looking back, I wonder if I missed the signs, small cracks in the foundation we'd worked so hard to build. 12 years of marriage is a long time to think you know someone completely. That's what I used to believe about Clara. Until small, almost imperceptible cracks started appearing in the foundation of our life together. It began with little things, subtle shifts that wouldn't seem significant unless you were paying attention. And I was. Clara had always been a homebody, content with family life and the occasional evening out with her friend Naomi. But over the past 6 months, those occasional evenings had multiplied. First, it was PDA meetings. At least, that's what she called them. She and Naomi, both active in the Parent-Teacher Association, claimed they needed to meet weekly to help with school fundraisers. It sounded plausible until I casually mentioned her involvement to the PTA secretary one day, who looked at me with genuine confusion and said, "But Clara hasn't been to a meeting in months." Then came the shopping trips, long hours out with Naomi, returning with little to show for it. Clara's excuses were always vague. "We didn't find anything we liked," she'd say, brushing it off with a smile. But I noticed other changes. She'd shower before leaving and again as soon as she returned. I'd see her stepping out of the bathroom in freshly styled hair, wearing fancy underwear beneath her everyday clothes. Fancy underwear she never wore for me anymore. One evening, as she prepared to leave for yet another basket party, I casually asked if I could come along. Her reaction was immediate. Too immediate. She laughed nervously and said, "It's just a girl's thing, Ethan. You'd be bored out of your mind." That night, as she left, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Something wasn't adding up. The turning point came when I noticed her phone buzzing more than usual. Clara had always been casual about leaving her phone lying around, but lately she kept it close. Too close. One evening, when she left it unattended, curiosity got the better of me. Most of the calls were to Naomi, which didn't surprise me. But then there were repeated calls and texts to a name I didn't recognize. Kyle Saunders. I told myself it might be harmless. Maybe he was a friend from Naomi's work, or someone Clara was consulting about a school project. But the late-night texts, the lengths of the calls, they didn't feel like they belonged to the life we'd built together. Still, I hesitated. Clara had always been loyal. Or so I believed. Confronting her without proof felt wrong, but ignoring the signs felt worse. One night after she returned from one of her parties, I checked her phone again. This time, I called the number for Kyle. The voicemail that answered sent a chill through me. "You've reached Kyle Saunders at Gilbert Engineering. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." Kyle Saunders worked with Naomi. The pieces were beginning to fit, and none of them painted a picture I wanted to see. I spent that night on the couch, staring at the ceiling and replaying every interaction in my mind. What had changed? When had it changed? Was I too blind to see it? Or too trusting to believe it could happen to me? The next morning, I decided I couldn't sit in silence any longer. Clara walked into the kitchen, her usual cheerful self, humming as she poured coffee. She looked up at me and said, "You're up early." I stared at her, the knot in my stomach tightening. Something was wrong. I was sure of it now, and I was done pretending otherwise. The morning after my sleepless night, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring at Clara as she bustled about, humming softly as though everything was perfectly normal. But it wasn't normal. Not anymore. Every small crack in our life together was now a glaring fault line, and I couldn't ignore it. Clara caught me watching her and smiled. "You're up early? Something on your mind?" I didn't respond right away. I just studied her, trying to see the woman I'd fallen in love with. The girl I'd known since we were 10 years old. But all I could see now were the inconsistencies, the excuses, the lies. "Tell me about your affair," I said, my voice calm but firm. Her smile faltered, replaced by a look of confusion. "What?" she asked, laughing nervously. "What are you talking about?" "You heard me, Clara. Tell me about your affair." She put down the mug she'd been holding and crossed her arms, her tone growing defensive. "Ethan, that's ridiculous. Why would you even say something like that?" "I'm not in the mood to play games," I replied, leaning forward. "Who's Kyle Saunders?" Her eyes widened for the briefest of moments before she caught herself, masking her reaction with indignation. "Kyle? He's just a friend, someone Naomi works with. Why are you even asking about him?" "Just a friend?" I said, letting the words hang in the air. "A friend you call and text at all hours? A friend you see on your girls' nights that don't actually involve the PTA or basket parties? A friend who leaves you so sticky that you need to take a shower the moment you get home?" Her face turned pale, and for a moment she looked like she might collapse under the weight of my words. But Clara was quick on her feet, always had been. "Ethan, I can't believe you're saying this. Are you seriously accusing me of cheating? Do you even hear yourself right now?" "I hear myself just fine," I said, my voice rising slightly. "What I want is for you to stop lying to me." The room was silent except for the sound of my daughter's footsteps upstairs. Clara glanced toward the ceiling, clearly hoping they wouldn't come down. "This is all in your head," she said finally. "You're making something out of nothing." I pulled my phone from my pocket and played the voicemail I'd recorded from Kyle's number. "You've reached Kyle Saunders at Gilbert Engineering." Clara's face turned ashen. "Do you want to try again?" I asked. She sank into a chair, her hands trembling. "Ethan, please, it's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is," I demanded. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks exactly like what I think." Tears welled in her eyes, and for a moment, I thought she might tell me the truth. Instead, she said, "It's complicated." "Complicated?" I snapped, slamming my hand on the table. "What's complicated about you sneaking around with another man? What's complicated about you lying to me, to our daughters?" Her tears spilled over, and she buried her face in her hands. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she sobbed. It just did." "So you admit it," I said, my voice cold. "You've been cheating on me." "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I've been seeing Kyle." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Even though I'd known, deep down I'd known, hearing her say it felt like a punch to the gut. "Did you sleep with him?" I asked, my voice trembling. She hesitated, and that hesitation was all the answer I needed. "Yes," she said finally. "I did." I stood up, unable to sit any longer, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "How long?" "A few months," she admitted. "Ethan, I'm sorry. I never meant for it to hurt you. It just—" "Don't," I said, cutting her off. "Don't tell me you didn't mean for it to hurt me. You knew exactly what you were doing. You knew, and you did it anyway." Her phone buzzed on the counter, breaking the tense silence. I picked it up and saw Kyle's name on the screen. Without hesitation, I answered and put the call on speaker. "Good morning, sugar," Kyle's voice said, cheerful and oblivious. "I just got to work and saw you tried to call me last night. Did you leave something at the house?" Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. I stared at her as I spoke into the phone. "Kyle, this is Ethan, Clara's husband. You know, the man she's been lying to while she's been sneaking around with you? There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line before Kyle stammered, I didn't mean to. I hung up before he could finish. Clara looked at me, her face a mix of shame and terror. Ethan, please, let me explain. You've done enough explaining, I said. I want you out of this house by the time I get back. Take whatever you can fit in your car and go. My mother will stay with the girls until I figure out the rest, and don't even think about trying to take them with you. I walked out the door, leaving Clara sitting at the table, sobbing. My world was falling apart, but I wasn't about to let her destroy what little I had left. The moment I walked out of the house, the weight of the confrontation hit me. Clara's tears, her confession, it all echoed in my mind, but I couldn't allow myself to dwell on it. Not yet. I needed to stay focused. There were practical matters to handle, and I couldn't let emotions cloud my judgment. The first step was the hardest, telling my daughters. Harper and Hazel were my world, and I dreaded how this would affect them. By the time I returned home, my mother was already there, cooking dinner in the kitchen. The girls were finishing their homework in the living room, their laughter a temporary balm for the chaos swirling inside me. I called them into the den, sitting them down on the couch. They could tell something was wrong. Their smiles faded as they looked at me with concern. Girls, I began, my voice steadier than I expected. There's something I need to tell you. Your mom and we've decided to take a break from each other for a while. Hazel frowned, crossing her arms. Why? What happened? Before I could respond, Harper smirked. I told you, Hazel, I win. Mom's cheating on Dad. My heart sank. What did you just say? Harper shrugged, her expression a mix of anger and vindication. We're not stupid, Dad. We know what's going on. Mom's been acting weird for months. We even saw a picture of her with some guy at Noble's Grove. One of our friends showed us. Hazel nodded reluctantly, adding, and Tracy's parents saw her and Aunt Naomi with two guys at TGI Fridays. We didn't want to believe it, but she trailed off, tears welling in her eyes. I sat there, stunned. My 12-year-old daughters had pieced together what I'd been too blind or too trusting to see. Why didn't you tell me? I asked quietly. We didn't want to hurt you, Harper said, her voice softening. But we figured you'd find out eventually. I pulled them into a hug, their small arms wrapping around me as I fought to keep my emotions in check. I'm so sorry, girls. I promise, no matter what happens, I'm here for you, always. The conversation left me drained, but there was no time to rest. I needed to inform Luke, Naomi's husband. He deserved to know the truth about his wife, just as I'd learned about mine. I called Luke and told him everything. The false excuses, the secret meetings, and the connection between Clara and Kyle. There was silence on the other end before Luke spoke, his voice heavy with disbelief. Are you sure, Ethan? This doesn't sound like Naomi. I wish I weren't, I said. But you need to ask her about a guy named Colin Bradford. He works with her and Kyle at Gilbert Engineering. Luke didn't respond, but I could hear the tension in his breathing. He hung up without another word. Later that afternoon, I got a call from Luke's cell phone. His tone was frantic. Ethan, it's bad. I went to Naomi's office and confronted her. She admitted everything, about her affair and introducing Clara to Kyle. I saw red, man. I tracked down Colin in the parking lot, and things got messy. Messy how? I asked, already bracing for the worst. I hit him, Luke admitted. A lot. Security had to tase me to stop me. Now I'm sitting in a holding cell waiting for my brother to bail me out. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The fallout from Clara's betrayal was spreading like wildfire, pulling everyone into its destructive path. Back home, Clara was packing her things while my mother kept the girls occupied. She avoided looking at me as I walked in, but I couldn't resist one final question. Clara, before you go, tell me the truth. Did Naomi introduce you to Kyle? She hesitated, then nodded. Yes. And who's Colin Bradford? Her face turned pale and she stammered, That's Naomi's friend. I let out a bitter laugh. Friend, right. You two really did a number on us, didn't you? She didn't answer, her hands trembling as she zipped up her suitcase. Ethan, I'm sorry, she said softly. Sorry doesn't cut it, I replied. Not after what you've done. After Clara left, the house felt quieter, almost hollow. My daughters went back to their usual routine, though I could see the hurt in their eyes. My mom stayed to help with dinner, but my thoughts were elsewhere, focused on what Clara had done and why. Her betrayal was bad enough, but something about it felt calculated, as though there was more to the story than she'd admitted. That evening, I decided to follow the only lead I had left, Kyle Saunders. The voicemail on his work number had already confirmed his connection to Clara, but I needed answers. I drove to his house, a modest ranch-style home on the edge of town, and parked across the street. His white Lexus was in the driveway, the trunk open, and several suitcases were loaded inside. It didn't take a genius to figure out what was happening. Kyle was skipping town. I approached the house just as he walked out the front door with an armful of clothes. When he saw me, he froze, his eyes wide with panic. Without a word, he dropped everything and bolted back inside, slamming the door behind him. I followed, entering the house cautiously. Kyle, I called out, my voice echoing through the empty living room. You can run, but you can't hide forever. We need to talk. There was no response, but I heard the faint sound of a back door creaking open. By the time I reached it, Kyle was gone, the yard empty. I wasn't about to chase him, though. My eyes scanned the room, taking in the half-packed boxes and discarded papers. On a desk in the corner, I spotted a laptop and a cell phone. Next to them was a folder containing Kyle's passport and several official-looking documents. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the folder. Inside, I found job offer letters and travel plans for an engineering project in Spain. Kyle had been planning this for a while. Weeks, maybe months. As I flipped through the papers, something else caught my eye. A series of printed emails. They were between Kyle and Clara. My heart sank as I read them, each one revealing more about their relationship and their plans. Clara had been preparing to leave me for Kyle, intending to join him in Spain once his project began. But the most devastating part came at the end of one email. Clara was plotting to take full custody of Harper and Hazel. She believed I wouldn't allow her to take them out of the country, so she planned to have me declared an unfit father. The email didn't detail how she intended to do it, but the implication was clear. She was willing to destroy my reputation and my relationship with my daughters to get what she wanted. I printed the emails and took the laptop, phone, and folder with me. It felt wrong to take his things, but I wasn't about to let Kyle slip away without facing the consequences of what he and Clara had done. Before leaving, I let the air out of one of his car tires. It was petty, but I needed him to know I wasn't letting this go. Back at home, I sat in my den, poring over the contents of the laptop. There were no explicit photos or texts, but the messages between Kyle and Clara were damning enough. They spoke of love, of starting a new life together, and of leaving me behind. As I scrolled through the files, another name kept popping up. Colin Bradford. He was mentioned in several emails, mostly in connection with Naomi. It didn't take long to piece it together. Colin was Naomi's version of Kyle. The betrayal extended beyond Clara and me. Naomi had been just as deceitful with her husband, Luke. The next morning, I decided to confront Clara one last time. I called her parents' house, where she'd been staying since our confrontation. When she answered, her voice was hesitant. Ethan, I don't think we have anything left to talk about. Oh, we do, I said. I know about your plans to take the girls to Spain. I know about the emails, Clara. How could you even think of doing that to me? There was silence on the other end before she finally spoke. Ethan, I didn't mean for it to go this far. Kyle and I we fell in love. And what about our daughters? I snapped. Were they just pawns in your plan to start a new life with him? I wasn't trying to hurt them, she said softly. I thought it was the only way. The only way? I repeated, my anger boiling over. The only way for what? To rip them away from their father? To destroy their sense of stability? You weren't thinking about them, Clara. You were only thinking about yourself. She started to cry, but I didn't have the energy to comfort her. You've made your choices, I said coldly. Now I'm going to make mine. I'm filing for custody of Harper and Hazel, and I'll use every piece of evidence I have to make sure you don't take them away from me. I hung up before she could respond, my resolve stronger than ever. I wouldn't let Clara's betrayal destroy the life I'd built for my daughters. No matter what it took, I'd fight to keep them safe. The fallout from Clara's betrayal wasn't over, but for the first time in days, I felt a sense of clarity. I had a plan now, one that prioritized my daughters and ensured their stability. As I sat in my den, surrounded by evidence of Clara's lies, the anger that had consumed me began to shift into determination. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for Harper and Hazel. The first step was simple but necessary. I canceled the joint credit card Clara and I shared, ensuring she couldn't rack up debt in my name. I changed the PIN on our ATM card and set up alerts for the checking account. It was a small victory, but it gave me a sense of control over a situation that had felt so chaotic. I spent the rest of the morning preparing for the custody battle. The emails I'd printed from Kyle's laptop were damning, especially the ones that detailed Clara's plan to have me declared unfit. While the messages weren't from her directly, they were enough to raise serious questions about her intentions. Meanwhile, my mom stayed with the girls, helping them through the transition. Harper and Hazel were resilient, but I could see how the situation was affecting them. Harper masked her pain with sarcasm, while Hazel withdrew into herself, quieter than usual. At dinner, I made a point to sit with them and talk about the changes ahead. "Girls," I began, my voice steady, "I know things are hard right now, but I promise you, we'll get through this. No matter what happens, I'm here for you, and I'll always fight to keep our family together." Harper looked at me, her eyes sharp. "Does that mean Mom won't take us away?" "I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that doesn't happen," I replied. "But you need to be honest with me, okay? If anything happens, if Mom says anything that makes you uncomfortable, I need to know." They both nodded, their trust in me palpable. It was a small but significant moment, one that reminded me of why I was fighting so hard. The next day, I reached out to a family lawyer recommended by a colleague. I laid everything on the table, the emails, the evidence of Clara's affair, and her plan to leave the country with Kyle. The lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Margaret, assured me that we had a strong case. "Custody battles are messy," she said, "but the courts prioritize the well-being of the children. With this evidence and your clear commitment to your daughters, you stand a good chance." Her confidence bolstered my resolve, but I knew the fight wasn't just in the courtroom. Clara would likely try to manipulate the situation, playing the victim to garner sympathy. I needed to stay calm and focused, no matter what she threw my way. Clara's first move was predictable. She called me later that evening, her voice trembling with fake remorse. "Ethan, can we talk? Not about custody or lawyers, just about us, about the girls." "There's nothing to talk about," I said firmly. "You made your choices, Clara. Now you have to live with them." "But the girls need both of us," she pleaded. "Can't we find a way to work this out without dragging them through a legal battle?" I almost laughed at the irony. "You mean the way you plan to declare me unfit and take them to Spain? Spare me, Clara. This is about what's best for Harper and Hazel, and you've shown me exactly where your priorities lie." She hung up, her true frustration leaking through the cracks in her calm facade. In the days that followed, I focused on rebuilding a sense of normalcy for my daughters. I took them to their favorite park, helped them with their school projects, and even attempted a homemade pizza night, which ended with more flour on the floor than in the dough. Through it all, I reminded them and myself that life could still be good, even in the face of betrayal. As for Kyle, I learned through a contact at Gilbert Engineering that he'd resigned and left town. Good riddance. Clara's accomplice was gone, and her support system was crumbling. Naomi, too, faced the consequences of her actions. Luke had filed for divorce, and word around town was that Colin Bradford was avoiding her like the plague. Despite everything, there was a part of me that still grieved. Not for Clara, but for the life we'd built together. The life I thought we had. It was hard to reconcile the woman I'd loved with the person who had betrayed me so deeply.